I'm a university researcher. I trained as a chemist and have worked for many years as an environmental scientist. In my job, I try to use chemistry to understand the societal trade-offs and consequences associated with our decisions about the way we use the planet's limited resources. Today, I'd like to talk to you about why we have to talk about hazardous substances when we're discussing our relationship with plastic and plastic additives. Plastic is a big part of our everyday life. It's convenient, it's cheap, and for a long time we've been able to ignore the trade-offs. We need to change our relationship with plastic, not just for our future, but for the future of the planet. Our relationship with plastic and the additives it contains is at the heart of the issues of climate change, chemicals, and circularity. I'd like to give you a really quick background on what plastic additives are. Plastic additives are chemicals that are added during manufacturing to give plastic new properties, including flexibility, durability, or heat resistance. For example, bisphenol A, or BPA, is added to plastic articles to make them heat and shatter resistant. All of the properties that we get from plastic additives are useful or desirable, and we can make a product more valuable to us. But there are potentially negative side effects, consequences, and trade-offs that we need to highlight and recognize. Unfortunately, some plastic additives can be extremely harmful to our health. Plastic additives can be present in large amounts. It surprised me when I learned that additives could be more than 70% of the weight of an article. So it's almost like saying the plastic polymer is the additive, the minority component, and the additive is the majority component. Additives that are in plastic can leach out either by design for some groups of additives or unintentionally during use or after the plastic is disposed of. The issue of additive leaching and additive loss is concerning, as some plastic additives are extremely toxic. Specifically, some additives may have endocrine disrupting properties. There are a number of definitions of endocrine disrupting chemicals and what endocrine disrupting properties are, but I think this is a good one and it's fairly general. Endocrine disrupting chemicals are mixture chemicals that interfere with any aspect of hormone action. Hormones are the chemicals that regulate our body's functions and processes, including development, metabolism, reproduction, stress, and immune responses. If early development is interfered with, you can grow up less healthy or less intelligent. The hormone system controls metabolism. Interfere with these controls, and obesity or hunger can result. Pretty much anything we do is controlled to one degree or another by hormones. Anything that interferes with hormone activity and regulation is something we ought to be concerned about. I'd like to talk a little bit about why I think plastic pollution is a visible problem, but plastic additives with endocrine disrupting properties are still invisible. I'm sure you've all seen a picture like this of a dead bird with lots of plastic in its stomach. We also hear about the dolphins with plastic in their stomachs. Plastic pollution and the harm due to plastic is very visible. This visibility makes it easy to have an emotional response. This came up as my screensaver the other day. I think screensavers are generally designed to get a warm and positive emotional response. But for me, the dolphins are part of a long and very disturbing story. Far too often, when dolphins or other marine mammals are washed up dead on shore, they're found to have high levels of endocrine disrupting substances in their bodies. Often the levels are so high that the carcasses of these marine mammals have to be treated as hazardous waste. They cannot just be buried, they have to be disposed of the same way we get rid of poison. I'd like to dig down a bit more into why the endocrine disrupting substances found in plastic additives should be more of a concern than the plastic itself. I'm going to talk a little about how endocrine disruptors can affect both the organism itself and its offspring. If a mother mammal consumes endocrine disrupting substances, it can affect her health, and if she's pregnant, the health of her unborn children. What I find really scary is that some of the effects on her child's health would be on that unborn child's germ cells. To put it another way, exposure to endocrine disrupting substances can affect the present generation, their children, and their grandchildren. Sure, plastics can be very harmful. We can see from the pictures of the dead birds that plastics can kill. I'd say plastic additives, specifically endocrine disrupting substances, are even more troubling because they may not only harm the current generation, but can cause harm multiple generations into the future. Now there's a problem with the story I've just told. That problem is proof. Certainly it's pretty clear that plastic killed the bird, or at least plastic consumption was a major factor. Health effects of endocrine-disrupting chemicals are a lot harder to prove. There are many studies on animals, we have expert knowledge of effects, and a lot of good theories suggesting that exposure to endocrine-disrupting substances is likely to be a problem, but we cannot yet demonstrate this harm in the same way we can demonstrate the harm caused by ingesting plastics. This lack of certainty leads to different regulatory actions. For example, bisphenol A is banned in the European Union because of its endocrine-disrupting properties, but its use is currently allowed in the United States. In some ways, the harmful effects of plastic additives are hard to clearly demonstrate. Perhaps that's why they're invisible. In our quest for a more sustainable future, we've been going after the easy, visible stuff, but I hope we can lift the invisible and what I believe are the more relevant issues for our survival as a species. I'd like to propose to you two things that we can do to make the invisible visible. These are to improve our understanding and to act. Thinking about improving our understanding. There are many sources of exposure to endocrine-disrupting substances, but I'm going to focus on food contact material, as this is where we can combine understanding and action, and where I, as a chemist, can explain the problem. One of my first jobs at university was breeding chili peppers. Ever since then, I've really liked hot chilies, and one of the best ways to satisfy my craving is with chili oil. There's a saying, oil and water don't mix. This is also one of the first things I learned as a chemist. I was taught the phrase, like extracts like. This is why many of us keep a vanilla bean in alcohol, so we can extract the flavor. Now, if you want to use an oil, use an oil to extract it. The substances that give chili its flavor are about 1,000 times more soluble in oil than they are in water. So if you want to get the chili flavor out of the chili pepper and into something else, you should mix it with oil, and the flavor will come out and into the oil. That's the good news. The bad news is that bisphenol A is chemically kind of similar to chili oil. Bisphenol A is also about 1,000 times more soluble in oil than in water. So if you store oily foods, like sausage or cheese, in some sort of plastic that contains bisphenol A, you run the risk of pulling endocrine-disrupting substances out of the plastic and into the food which you and your family then consume. What now? We understand there's problems with food contact materials. There's theoretical reasons to believe that we will pull hazardous substances out of the plastic and into the food we then eat. This can be demonstrated in the lab. But it's hard to really quantify in our daily lives. Similarly with the dolphins, there are theoretical reasons to argue for the harm of endocrine-disrupting substances going to the third generation, but it's hard to prove in practice. We're getting more and more evidence every day, but we're still at a stage where experts can argue about endocrine-disrupting substances in plastics. One of the things I feel very strongly about is that we should always make our arguments based upon evidence that is absolutely rock solid. We also have a responsibility to be honest about any lack of scientific certainty. This then opens up the question of how we should act. Years ago, in the early days of climate change science, before it was really clearly established that we were causing global warming, one of my older colleagues said to me, "Well, there's still some debate, but let me give you a metaphor. If you're driving in the fog, what do? You slow down, you're more careful." I'd say that we need to take the same attitude with plastic additives. We need to slow down and we need to be more careful. We should substitute or avoid potentially hazardous substances whenever possible and think about how we act. As a society, we must continue to generate new knowledge, but we must also act in a way that protects our health and the health of those around us. What I hope I've done in the past few minutes is to highlight the need to make an invisible issue visible and to stress that despite the uncertainty in our understanding, we can still act. There are things we can all do to make a difference.
Den Link zum Handbuch und weitere Informationen zum Thema findest du in der Beschreibung. Wenn dir dieses Video gefallen hat, lass uns gerne ein Like da und teile dieses Video mit deinen Freundinnen und Freundinnen. Abonniere unseren Kanal für weitere Videos. Hast du Fragen oder Anregungen? Dann lass uns gerne einen Kommentar da.